Welcome, listeners. Just to let you know, we have a new initiative and it's called Buy Us a Coffee. You may have heard of it. But if you'd like to donate to our podcast to support it, if you'd like to, there is a link in the description.
So if you're available, if you can, or if you want to, we'll really appreciate it. And yeah, so to keep supporting the podcast, and yeah, we love doing it, and we hope that you enjoy listening to it too.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Welcome back to the English Boys.
The show where we discuss all things literature.
I'm Samuel.
And I'm Louis, and thank you for tuning in. James, how are we?
Hello, I'm very happy to be here, thank you.
So, everybody, today we are joined by James Carder-Geddes, who is a upper sixth student at our school, and he is a big Ted Hughes enthusiast, and I would probably say top English student, especially all things poetry in our...
Oh, well, that's very kind, Samuel, thank you.
Brilliant. So, yes, as we mentioned, today we are going to talk about Ted Hughes. James is going to give us a rundown on his life, his childhood, some of his poetry as well, and how his life has demonstrated throughout his poetry.
A big deep dive, if you will.
Yes, exactly. Brilliant. So let's take it away.
Yeah, so Ted Hughes, Edward Hughes. He was born in Mithenrod in Yorkshire. I've probably butchered that pronunciation, but he was born in the rural areas of Yorkshire. And so therefore he was exposed to nature and the environment an awful lot. He was very interested in hunting, swimming and fishing, and spent a lot of time with his friends. One of his friends, whose name I've forgotten, his father was a gamekeeper.
Okay.
And so he spent a lot of time kind of hunting pheasants and rats and owls, and he acted as the retriever for that. So yeah, really, he grew up in this kind of rural environment, moved around a bit. I think he moved to Mexborough from Yorkshire, and then he would later spend his final years in Devon. He was always an avid English and poetry enthusiast from a very young age, and his teachers noticed his talent. In the schools, he was inspired a lot by T.S. Eliot and Gerald Manley Hopkins, amongst others. And yeah, he mostly just thrived in poetry. By the age of 16, kind of your age, he was writing poems, and he didn't want to be anything else really other than a poet. By the age of 16, he was born in 1930. Sorry, I should have said, and died in 1998. For his military service, he worked as a ground wireless mechanic for the RAF, and that was a two-year post, which he did immediately after school. And then he was offered an exhibition, which is like a scholarship at Pembroke College, Cambridge, where he read English. Yeah, so, well, one of his early poems that I read, and it's in his collected anthology, which I would thoroughly recommend, is called The Wild West. And he kind of writes in these cliched rhyming couplets, and it's really interesting to see his early work and his early form.
And I guess you start to see like his progression as a poet.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
He changed a lot. I mean, it wasn't the best poem, to be honest, Wild West, when I read it. But you could see his kind of figments of talent coming through. And then he studied English at Cambridge, but then he absolutely hated the kind of entrapment that literary criticism put on his work. And he hated the fact that there was a set list of rules for studying poetry, and there were a set list of people who theorized differently about his work. And so I think at one stage he called it all like the terrible entrapping maternal octopus of literary criticism, and he wanted to get away from that. So he switched in his final year to archaeology and anthropology. Which really informed his themes of kind of mythology and spirituality that comes through in his work.
Yeah.
And I think sorry, there you go.
No, I think we might be onto the same thing, and it's about the dream with the fox. Could you tell us a bit
the
about
thought
that?
fox? Yeah. I can't remember where it was, but he was in his flat. I think it was whilst he was at university. And he was having tanned in all these all these essays rather for his classes at university, and he felt that his creative freedom and expression was really inhibited by what he was being made to do as part of his curriculum. And so he sat down one evening at the end of his bed, and if I can't quite recall where he was. I'm sorry, it's a bit misty, but
No, not at all.
he formulated this poem from a vision of a fox in the midnight moments forest or whatever it is, and absolutely beautifully he encapsulated that creative energy of the fox as a sort of muse. And I'm sure you've discussed this in your other podcast, which you should listen to. And the beauty of nature really came through in the genesis of that poem, and it kick-started all his other nature poems in anthologies such as Season Songs or Woodwoe or Crow, which is a brilliant one because Hughes represents the figure of the crow as both a god and his alter ego and the force of nature, and it all kind of synthesized in this one symbol.
Did we go over the crow that half term?
Yes,
I think we glazed over.
Yeah, we did. We looked at one of the poems.
Yeah,
I can't remember what it was, but yeah, he's written a lot.
So would you say all of his poems have this theme of nature and spirituality in a way?
Yeah, I think he kind of writes over this very gritty elemental landscape, pulling in all the different elements of nature. And he's fascinated by the natural, but he also is fascinated by the supernatural. And Simon Armitage, who is the current poet laureate, whom I also love, calls him a super nature poet, because he kind of goes beyond the physical and the tangible into this more spiritual realm. And I think he was hugely influenced by shamanism and alchemy and Buddhism. Okay. And I think he believed at one point, he was purported to say that imagination kind of limits the psyche. I mean, I don't have a clue what I'm talking about, to be honest, because it's all Oriental religion, quite new to me. But yeah, he kind of, what I love so much about Hughes as a poet, and why I love him so much, is that he was able to make the natural unnatural. He was able to make the unnatural natural.
I think that's what the amazing thing that poetry can do, is they take something so ordinary, and it brings it into different light. So even like what you think about like the horses is one that we've briefly like kind of discussed. It's literally just horses standing in a field, and he does so much vivid imagery and in this really captivating way. I think yeah, would you say that's one of the big draws for Hughes for you? Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. I can think of another poem which is even more ridiculous, which is he takes grass and he makes it interesting. So the poem's called Hay. It's in his Season Songs anthology.
Okay.
Which was actually initially written as a series of season songs for a little primary school in a place called Little Missenden, which is literally in the absolute middle of blooming nowhere. And he wrote about 5 songs for the smallest school concert you could possibly imagine. And people went, wow, this guy's good. And he built up a name for himself at this stage, but they really liked it. And so he then developed these poems, and he says they kind of grew up, they kind of matured into what became the Season Songs anthology, which is about 28 poems, I think, equally divided among the seasons. But sorry, back to the poem Hay in that anthology. He basically writes about grass in a field, and he says kind of the grass is happy to be blown over by the wind. The grass is happy to be brushed over by animal fur. The grass is happy, and then suddenly, until he came to mow, and the poem ends in this awful image of a farmer cutting down the grass, and that's
brilliant.
Yeah.
I guess going back to the making the unnatural seem natural, even telegraph wires, which listeners, you should also go and read. That's a brilliant poem. Just talking about these pylons, and he talks about he almost makes them, he personifies them, but kind of integrates them into human society in a way that you wouldn't really expect at all. But no, I think Hughes he's a great twister of normality, isn't he?
Definitely.
So, would you like to tell us a little bit about Hughes's relationships and how that has influenced his poetry?
Yes. So he was described as a tower of a man by Seamus Heaney in his funeral speech. I remember. I think he was called like a tower of gentleness. He had a very deep, mellow Yorkshire voice, Yorkshire accent. Sorry, and he this turned many girls towards him when he was at university. And he was an editor for what was known as the St. Botolph's Review. One of his poems is called St. Botolph's, which is basically based around it. But it was a university magazine for Pembroke, Cambridge, where he was studying. And I think it wasn't until a few years after his bachelor's degree that he actually met Sylvia Plath, the American poet, who had come over on some scholarship, Smith College, something like that, from America. And she was at the review, and they met, and it was basically love at first sight. Okay. And I think they went back to his flat or something, and made something. Poetry. And they didn't have any children until 1961 and 1962. It was Frida Hughes, who was the daughter, born in 61, I think, and Nicholas, the son, was born in 62. I think that's right, but I would have to check.
Am I right that Nicholas also ended up taking his own life?
He did, very sadly, yeah, in 2000 and something, yeah.
Yes, yeah.
The whole manic depression of Plath was genetically passed down to him, I think.
I see. Brilliant.
So what was the fate of Plath?
Well, not so brilliant. For either of them. But so the fate of Plath, okay, we're jumping straight to it. But the fate of Plath was ultimately suicide by asphyxiating herself by sticking her head in a gas oven, unfortunately, very sadly, on the 11th of February 1963. And she was she kind of stuck paper towels underneath and around doors. Sorry, I probably should have given some content warning these days. She stuck paper towels around the doors, turned on the gas, stuck her head in the oven. The kids were sleeping on the sofa in the other room in the early hours of the morning. And it was she had separated from Hughes at this stage because of an affair Hughes was having with a German poet, artist, photographer called Assia Weevil, who was subletting his London flat. Okay. And I think the events transpired when she had Plath intercepted a phone call between Hughes and Weevil, and it made very clear to her that he was having an affair.
Weren't they like family friends? They were like couple friends before.
Yeah, they were exactly.
Yeah,
because they were subletting their flat in London.
Yeah,
and so they made frequent visits, and that's when it all kind of occurred. But yeah, from the moment Hughes met Plath, and they pretty much imminently married and entered into what would be a very tumultuous kind of 6-7 year marriage. It was never going to be easy from the get-go. And Hughes actually also, so after Plath's suicide tragically in 1963, Hughes lived with Weevil for 7 years or something, and then he had another affair with a nurse, Carol Orchard, whom he then married after Weevil met the same fate by sticking her head in a gas oven almost exactly 7 years later after Plath.
And that's hinted a bit at in A Memory, where they talk about her suicide note.
Yes.
They hint at.
Yeah, he occasionally draws in the suicide theme into his poetry, but it's quite rare because he evidently wasn't proud of it, as he should have been, because a huge part of that, his own relationship with Plath and the affairs he had, contributed to her suicide in the end.
Listeners, if you can hear some music being played, we are just in the music block at school, so
we apologise for that.
It's not any music we've popped onto the podcast. Yes, anyway. Brilliant. Hughes had quite a lot of publicity and controversy about those two.
Certainly, controversy,
deaths,
yeah.
And in some ways for good reason, because of the torment that those two women experienced or went through. Do you want to talk a bit about that?
Yeah, so basically, Hughes stopped writing poetry for about 3 years after Plath's suicide. He just took a big pause, put everything on hold, and he was met with this kind of tidal wave of hatred and anger by the press at his culpability, complicity in Plath's suicide. And so he naturally shut down. He never put his hands up properly and said, yeah, look, I do feel really bad. But in a way, the feelings kind of insidiously grew to his birthday letters anthology in 1998, which is his seminal work, I would say. Forget the Thought Fox, forget Horses, forget Telegraph Wise. They're all brilliant. But birthday letters is Hughes at his absolute best. And the critics would all agree, I think.
Okay.
And also he was writing it as he was dying. He suffered from colon cancer, which finished him off in October 1998, 26th, I think. And he was, so this anthology was basically the result of 30 years of silence that he broke eventually. And all those feelings, you can imagine all that pent up emotion that he just wanted to get off his chest was put down to paper in these birthday letters. And they're neither celebratory or birthday-like in their tone at all. And they're not really letters either. They're just a collection of poems.
So why was it entitled Birthday Letters? If it was particularly celebratory?
I don't know. I would have to ask Hughes, which I can't. I'm afraid I don't know.
No. Right. Brilliant. James, what do you really like about Hughes? Give us an insight.
What do I love about Hughes? I love how he covers this really gritty, I use that word again, unnatural, stark landscape that he extirpates from the forests and the woodlands and the valleys. He lived, in a wide variety of contexts. He was, as I said, this military service. He said all he did was read and reread Shakespeare and watched the grass grow. I think that was a rough paraphrase of what Hughes said. He did. But just his ability to build up nature from a really humble base level and then also elevate it to the supernatural and make it really spiritual and ethereal. And the fact that he's able to use these two different forces that coexist in his poetry equates him to the Romantic poets, to Hopkins, puts him in a league of his own. I think he's one of the greatest postmodern, which is a bit of a loose label, I know, poets of the 20th century, and certainly one of my favourites of all time.
So how do you feel generally as a poet? What sort of stands, like you talked about, making the natural seem unnatural and the idea of nature, and then your personal opinion. How do you feel Hughes stands out compared to other poets, especially like ones in other niches? Like you've got like genre of war poetry, and Hughes quite which is a bit of like an outlier, or like are people quite similar to his work, do you think?
I'd say he was a forerunner in nature poetry.
Right.
He was definitely a leading nature poet. But yes, I guess in a way he was writing in a sort of interim periods. I mean, he was writing. His father William had served in the Battle of Gallipoli, so his father was in World War One. Okay. He had some form of service, as I said, as a kind of ground wireless mechanic in World War Two.
Okay.
And also this was a period of the Cold War. We've got to remember there's kind of McCarthyism, communism, conservatism.
Yeah.
This was a period of political rifeness and tensions that was really growing. And there was a new poetic movement from the beat poets, much more kind of liberal poetry coming through. So yeah, I guess in many ways he was a bit vagrant, a bit kind of mobile.
So James, now, would you like to talk about a specific poem that you've selected?
Ooh, sure. Okay. Wow, testing me here. If we can get the poem in front of me, that'd be great. It's called Swifts by it's in the Season Songs anthology, and it is in I think it's in the summer section.
Okay.
And it opens it.
Here we are. I've got it.
Perfect, thank you. So, Swifts by Ted Hughes. 15th of May, cherry blossom. The swifts materialise at the tip of a long scream of needle. Look, they're back, look! And they're gone, on a steep, controlled scream of skid, round the house ends, and away under the cherries. Gone. Suddenly flickering in sky's summit, 3 or 4 together, gnat wisp frail, and hover searching, and listening for air chills. Are they too early? With a bowing power thrust to the left, then to right, then a flicker, they tilt into a slide, a tremble for balance, then a lashing down disappearance behind elms. They've made it again, which means the globe's still working, the creation's still waking refreshed, our summer's still all to come. And here they are again, erupting across yard stones, shrapnel scatter terror, frog gapers, speedway goggles, international mobsters. A bolus of 3 or 4 wire screams, jockeying across each other. On their switchback wheel of death, they swapped past, hard-fletched, veer on the hard air, toss up over the roof, and are gone again. Their mole-dark labouring, their lunatic limber, scramming frenzy and their whirling blades sparkle out into the blue. Not ours anymore. Rats ransack their nests, so now they shun us. Around luckier houses now, they crowd their evening dirt track meetings, racing their discords, screaming as if speed burned, head height, clipping the doorway with their leaden velocity, and their butterfly lightness, their too much power, their arrow thwack into the eaves. Every year, a first fling nearly flying misfit flopped in our yard, groggily somersaulting to get airborne. He bat-crawled on his tiny useless feet, tangling his flails like a broken toy, and shrieking thinly till I tossed him up. Then suddenly he flowed away under his bowed shoulders of enormous swimming power, slid away along levels, wobbling on the fine wire they've reduced life to, and crashed among the raspberries. Then followed fiery hospital hours in a kitchen, the moustached goblin savage nested in a scarf. The bright blank blind, like an angel, to my meat crumbs and flies. Then eyelids resting, wasted clingers curled, the inevitable balsa death. Finally, burial for the husk of my little Apollo. The charred scream folded in its huge power.
That is brilliant. That was
so
well read.
Isn't it such a great poem as well, though?
So is that your favourite, would you say?
Probably up there.
Really? Oh,
yeah.
Brilliant. So I'm not going to ask you what the poem means because I absolutely hate that question.
Yeah.
It's
no, yeah. I know what you mean.
Too objective.
Yes, you're like Hector in the History Boys. You said, "Don't ask me what a poem means, boys. I don't have a clue what it means."
If you want to unpack and see what you
go ahead.
Have the floor, James.
The title Swifts is pretty indicative of what it's about. It's about birds, swifts, but also swifts carries the connotation of quickness and alacrity, and that's very much carried through in the tone of the poem. There's a whole lot of energy coming through. I mean, just look at this alliteration. Didn't you hear it? The kind of shrapnel scatter terror.
Yeah.
And my personal favourite, which I almost had an anaphylactic shock trying to read. Every year a first fling nearly flying misfit flopped in our yard. Certain people would struggle to say that, wouldn't they?
They would.
And just the energy and electricity picked up in the poem of this sudden, unpredictable, capricious movement of the swifts through the sky. And then I love this line here as well, which says, "They've made it again," which means the globe's still working. The creation's still waking refreshed. Isn't that amazing how he says that just because he sees the swifts in the sky, that means that creation's still working.
Yeah.
For Hughes, it's the coming of the season of summer, but for him, it's just the observance of these birds that is enough to give him the reassurance of creation. And that's with a capital C, by the way, in the poem. So that we can obviously take that to mean a kind of religious connotation.
Yeah.
I wonder if that reminds you of any other poem that he's written.
I hold creation in my foot.
Nice.
Hawk roosting.
Excellent. Exactly what I was thinking. You can see that link. Yeah.
Yeah. That's brilliant.
It is similar. Yeah.
I wish we did this. I would love to do Swift.
Yeah, I know. I think the GCSE exam boards have an interesting selection. I don't think they've read wide enough into the depths of Hughes's poetry. But
just a quick one, James, concerning the Cambridge IGCSE. What do you think about? So essentially, listeners, we used to have coursework as, I think it was 20% of our exam, but now they've changed it to an unseen poem, which the teachers say everyone performed really well on last year, which I'm sure they did. But how do you feel about that change? Did you enjoy the coursework?
And what was it like?
I think the coursework was perhaps easier from my GCSE perspective, but I love poetry. It's my favourite form of English. It's the shortest, it's the most accessible, but it's also subversive, and it's able to turn turn people against each other, and it cuts across social boundaries, and that's what I love about poetry. I could read a 300-page Dickens novel. Actually, that's way too slim. 700-page Dickens novel, and not get nearly as much excitement as I would out of a seven-line poem. You know,
or even that 9/11 one, which sounds drastic, readers, but is it just 3 lines?
It is just 3 lines.
Wow.
It's something like, I woke up in the morning and I watched TV, then I went to work.
Yeah.
That's an awful paraphrasing, but it is as simple as poetry doesn't have to be long and wordy, and it really makes you focus. It's a craft, poetry. It's an art form, and you're really forced to focus in on each word and its meaning, because ultimately you don't have much there on the page. I mean, you can look at the shape of the word. So I'm looking at Swift's in front of me now, and it's weaving in and out. So on the left-hand side of the column, it's all straight, but on the right-hand side, it's choppy, and it falls in and out, just like the Swift's wings and the movement of the Swifts.
Anyway, back to Swift's. Go on.
Back to Swift's, yeah. So I suppose, wow, Samuel, your voice has got high. I suppose, please, we're trying to do a podcast there. The compound words shrapnel scatter and hover searching, gnat wisp, air chills, hard fletched. He loves a compound word. And do you know another poet who loves a compound word?
No, I don't.
Gerald Manley Hopkins. He loved them. He also Hughes likes to kind of use his spondies and trochees in the form as well.
When was Gerald?
Hopkins stumping me out there. When was Hopkins around? I would need to get back to you with an official date on that. But I know that Hughes was hugely influenced by a great number of poets, including Hopkins, and he also, so T.S. Eliot was another kind of favourite of his in terms of the form that he was writing, and he also loved Middle English, and he studied kind of the Middle English poets an enormous amount. But yeah, so sorry, back to Swift's. What I would say is that sorry, you asked me a question I completely forgot. Well, Gerald Manley Hopkins, 1844, I think he was born, and he died in something like 1890. I love how he personifies the Swifts as well. Like Hughes, a common feature of his work is to be able to make the natural animals and the beasts and the creatures into more human kind of characters. He calls them the moustached goblin savage. And I think
that's what stood out to me when you read that. I thought that was interesting.
And the international mobsters. He has these little phrases where he's comparing the movement of the Swifts to like an F1 track, with their speedway goggles, and it's brilliant, the animation that he's able to bring to the poem. But yeah, I think there's a lot more in it, but I don't want to bore you too long, so that's where I'd end with Swifts.
One thing I just would, if you don't mind me, just one thing that stood out to me was it used this is probably really basic in your eyes from just saying this, but it used it like erupted, and the idea of these like really, even though they're like extremely rapid, they're just really like gentle, and they're soaring, but yet they erupt like some manic volcano or something. I think that that's interesting. Just the power of these swifts that are coming and going and flying around.
Yeah, I think that's a brilliant word to use, volcanic. And you made a concession. Oh, this is too simple. Well, I must add, nothing's too simple in poetry, and sometimes simple is better. I'm going through quite technical stuff, but sometimes just stating the obvious, Louis, like you did there, and having an emotional response to poetry is much more powerful. So never ever tell yourself that you can't do
that. Brilliant. Thank you for reading out Swifts.
No problem.
Thank you, James.
Yeah, well, I think, James, you've really clearly stated you've got such a just array of knowledge and a breadth of knowledge. I think it's really really interesting to hear for both of us, and I think for the for any listeners who is coming into doing a GCSE on Ted Hughes. So both of us have our English literature exam on Ted Hughes, and you experience that as well.
Yes.
And I just think yeah. So thank you for coming to share.
Well, thank you so much for having me. It's been an absolute privilege. I feel very lucky to be a guest on this, and I think it's great that you're spreading your passion for English literature.
Oh, that's very kind.
So far and wide. So keep it up. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you,
Thank
James.
you.
Okay. Thank you.